What women fear most after hurting a good man, psychology tricks. The greatest tragedy of love is not that it ends, but that it ends while one person is still learning what they had. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't explode into shouting matches or dramatic goodbyes. It lands quietly, like a door closing without a slam. It happens when a good man stops trying, not because he hates her, not because he wants payback, but because something inside him finally settles into truth. I've done enough. For many men between 35 and 70, that turning point doesn't come after one fight. It comes after years of showing up, steady, loyal, emotionally available while feeling taken for granted. And when he finally leaves with calm, dignity, and distance, something shifts on the other side too. Here's what many people misunderstand. When a woman realizes she's wounded a genuinely good man, her deepest fear often isn't simply losing him. It's losing what he represented, what he provided without keeping score, what she may never find again because it wasn't common in the first place. And the fear goes even deeper than regret. It becomes psychological, permanent, because once a good man walks away the right way, without cruelty, without begging, without games, he doesn't just leave the relationship. He takes his presence, his protection, his patience, and his emotional safety with him. This is where the real fears begin. In the next part, we'll break down 7 of the deepest fears many women experience after hurting a good man, not to attack anyone and not to win the gender war, but to understand how value is recognized after it's gone, how consequences reshape attraction, and why some mistakes echo louder in silence than they ever did in conflict. 1. The fear that she lost something rare and won't find it again. After she hurts a good man, the first fear doesn't arrive loudly. It slips in quietly, almost politely, and sits with her when the noise fades, because good men are not flashy. They don't audition for love. They don't sell a fantasy. They simply show up and live it. Day after day, and only after he's gone does the weight of that truth land, heavy and undeniable, that what she lost wasn't replaceable. It was rare, and that realization stings in a way excitement never could. She may move on. Quickly, meet men who talk smoother, laugh louder, carry confidence like a badge, and at first it feels fine, even thrilling, but time has a way of slowing everything down, and when it does, the comparisons begin without permission, small thoughts she can't quite shut off. He listened without needing applause. He stayed steady when emotions ran high. He didn't vanish when things got complicated. He didn't need to be chased to remain present. And this is where fear takes root, not dramatic. Fear, but the deep kind, the kind shaped by female psychology, the kind that whispers late at night, asking uncomfortable questions about whether consistency is actually rarer than charm. Don't underestimate this moment. Because it's here that regret matures into awareness, and awareness cuts deeper as she starts noticing a pattern she didn't see before, that many men can start strong, but fewer can sustain effort, that attention is easy, but reliability is scarce, that emotional steadiness doesn't trend, doesn't announce itself, doesn't sparkle on first contact, and yet it's exactly what she now misses most. Be clear about this, because psychology tricks don't work on time, and time exposes everything, including the silent value of the man who stayed when it would have been easier to leave, and the fear grows sharper when she realizes those traits aren't just uncommon. They're often already claimed, spoken for, invested elsewhere. Building a life with someone who recognized their worth early. That is when the mind spirals into what ifs, replaying moments she once overlooked, moments that felt ordinary then but now glow with meaning, and she begins to wonder if she mistook calm for boredom, safety for predictability, emotional presence for something she thought she could easily find again. You must understand this isn't about punishment or blame. It's about perception catching up with reality, because female psychology often values intensity early on, but stability reveals its power later, when novelty fades and patterns matter. Don't confuse excitement with depth. Don't assume connection is common just because attraction is, because the fear she carries now is the fear of scarcity. The fear that she let go of something that doesn't circulate often. something that doesn't announce itself with grand gestures, but proves itself through consistency. And here's the quiet twist, the part rarely said out loud. The fear isn't only about losing him, it's about losing the version of herself she was with him, the calmer nervous system, the trust that grew slowly, the sense of being chosen without pressure, and this realization taps into how to fall in love in its most grounded form. Not the rush, not the chase, but the steady unfolding that feels unremarkable until it's gone. Psychology tricks can't manufacture that. They can't recreate the safety of being seen without performance. And when she notices that dating now feels louder but less fulfilling, busier but more hollow, the fear sharpens again because she knows something essential is missing. Be honest, because this is where clarity hurts most, when she understands that good men don't repeat themselves endlessly in the world. They're shaped by values, not trends, and once they're hurt deeply, they rarely return unchanged. If at all, that understanding settles in slowly, and with it comes the fear that she may search for years, meet dozens of people, and still not find the same quiet strength, the same emotional availability, the same steadiness that once felt so easy to take for granted. Don't rush past this point, because it explains why memories linger, why comparisons persist, why her standards shift after the loss, and why the fear doesn't fade quickly. It evolves, becoming more refined, more honest, more sobering. Psychology tricks might spark interest, female psychology might explain attraction, how to fall in love might be discussed endlessly, but none of that guarantees finding someone who stays grounded when life shakes, and that's the fear she now carries. Not dramatic, not bitter, just real. The fear that she recognized the value too late, and that timing, once missed, rarely circles back the same way again. 2. The fear that he'll heal, improve, and never look back. The second fear cuts deeper, quieter, and far more personally. The fear that he will heal, improve, and never look back, because one of the hardest psychological realities to face is watching someone grow after you were the one who hurt them. This isn't the kind of growth that happens loudly or dramatically. It's the kind that happens in silence. When a good man is wounded, he doesn't usually collapse into chaos or seek sympathy. He reflects. He recalibrates. He improves. That is the part many people underestimate. He gets healthier, not to prove a point, but because pain forces honesty. He starts taking care of his body, his sleep, his mind. He sets boundaries, not as punishment, but as protection. He becomes more confident and selective, not because he thinks he's better than others, but because he finally understands his value. Don't ignore how unsettling this can be to watch from the outside, because the fear isn't just that he'll move on, it's that he'll move forward and do it so well that the door quietly closes forever. What makes this fear so powerful is that it removes the illusion of control. When he was hurting, there may have been a sense, even an unconscious one, that he was still emotionally accessible, still tied to the past, still shaped by what happened. But healing changes that equation. Be clear about this. Healing is not passive. Healing is an upgrade. He starts choosing peace over chaos. He starts choosing clarity over confusion. He starts recognizing what aligns with him and what doesn't. That is masculine energy in its most grounded form, not loud, not performative, but steady and self-directed. And when a man steps into that space, especially a high-value man, he doesn't circle back for validation. He doesn't look over his shoulder. He builds forward. This is where the fear sharpens. Because now she isn't just watching him move on, she's watching him become someone she once hoped he would be, just no longer with her. That realization stings in a unique way. Don't dismiss it. It's not jealousy. It's regret mixed with clarity. She sees him happier, more centered, more discerning. He no longer overextends. He no longer explains himself endlessly. He no longer accepts inconsistency. And suddenly, the version of him she now admires is a version she no longer has access to. That is the fear. The future she once assumed would include her now exists without her name on it. You must understand how this ties into attraction. Growth is magnetic. Confidence rooted in self-respect changes how a man moves through the world. He speaks differently. He listens differently. He chooses differently. This is how men naturally attract women when they are aligned with themselves, not chasing approval, not trying to impress. A high value man doesn't advertise his worth. It shows in his standards. It shows in how he walks away from what no longer fits. And watching that transformation happen after she caused the wound creates a very specific psychological tension. The thought quietly forms, if I had treated him differently, would this version of him have been mine? Don't romanticize this fear, but don't minimize it either, because it's not about possession. It's about timing. The fear is that she met him before he fully stepped into himself, benefited from his patience and loyalty, but didn't recognize the cost of that patience until it was gone. Now she sees him operating with clarity, drawing better boundaries, choosing better situations, and she realizes something uncomfortable. The man she hurt was the foundation of the man she now respects. And foundations don't get revisited once the structure is complete. Be honest about what this means. When a man heals properly, he doesn't carry bitterness forward. He carries wisdom. He doesn't punish the past. He outgrows it. He doesn't seek closure conversations. He creates closure through action. He upgrades his environment, his habits, his relationships. He becomes selective with his time. That selectivity is not cold. It's intentional. And that intentionality is deeply attractive because it signals self-trust. This is how masculine energy stabilizes and strengthens, not through force, but through alignment. The fear deepens when she realizes she can no longer reach him emotionally. He's polite, maybe even kind, but distant. Not defensive, just unavailable. That is when it hits hardest. Because the wound she once caused no longer defines him, but it still defines the distance between them. Don't miss this point. The fear isn't about him becoming successful or desirable in general. It's about him becoming inaccessible to her specifically. The window closed quietly, without drama, without argument, without a final speech. And quiet endings are the hardest to reverse. You must take note of this if you're listening as a man. This is why self-improvement after heartbreak is not about revenge. It's about restoration. When you rebuild yourself honestly, you don't need to announce it. People notice. They always do. And when you do it for yourself, not to attract women, but to realign with who you are, the attraction becomes a byproduct. A high-value man doesn't chase attention. He attracts alignment. He doesn't beg for understanding. He lives in clarity. That is what changes the dynamic permanently. Don't go backward once you've healed. Be firm. Be grounded. Be consistent. That is the unspoken message in this fear. She isn't afraid of losing you as you were. She's afraid of losing access to who you've become. And once a man truly steps into that space, once his standards match his self-respect, once his masculine energy is calm and directed, he doesn't revisit old chapters. He writes new ones. And that, more than anything else, is what makes this fear linger long after the hurt itself has faded. And if this message resonates with you, make it real right now. Drop a comment that says, I heal, I improve, and I never look back. Like this video, subscribe for more grounded, unshakable insight, and remind yourself daily, growth is not revenge. It's direction. 3. The fear of being remembered as the one who failed him. When a woman hurts a good man, one of the deepest fears that follows her is not public judgment, but private memory, because women often measure life through emotional legacy, and the question that echoes in silence is brutal and persistent. How will I be remembered by him and by myself? She may move on outwardly, build a career, form new relationships, post smiles in modern life's digital theater, yet inside there is a quiet reckoning. Was I the moment where trust cracked? Was I the reason a man who once offered patience, clarity, and consistency learned restraint instead of openness, distance instead of warmth, discipline instead of devotion? This fear is not about losing him in the present. It is about losing the version of herself she could have been with him, because being remembered as a lesson instead of a love cuts deeper than rejection ever could. And as Maya Angelou famously said, people will never forget how you made them feel, a truth that becomes heavier with time, not lighter. In today's fast moving world where relationships are treated as replaceable and attention is fragmented, a good man stands out precisely because he does not rush, does not play games, does not withdraw effort when challenged, and when such a man is hurt. He rarely retaliates, he adapts, he recalibrates, he grows quieter and stronger, and that transformation becomes the mirror she cannot avoid, because the fear is not that he will speak badly of her, but that he will remember her calmly, clearly. Without bitterness as a turning point, and calm remembrance is the sharpest form of truth. This is where Old Stoic wisdom becomes relevant, because the Stoics taught that character is revealed not in comfort, but in consequence, and when a man practices Stoicism when in his own life, he does not chase validation or closure. He builds an iron mind, and that iron mind becomes unforgettable to the one who once underestimated its value. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury," and for men between 35 and 70, this is instruction, not poetry. Do not explain. Do not perform. Do not seek to be understood by someone who already chose differently. Instead, live so steadily that your absence teaches what your presence once offered. The fear women carry after hurting a good man is that they will look back years later, in quieter seasons of life, and realize they let go of emotional safety for temporary excitement, consistency for novelty, depth for distraction. And this realization often arrives when options narrow and reflection sharpens, because memory matures even when people try to outrun it. In modern life, where social media amplifies comparison and regret, being remembered as the one who failed him is not about shame. It is about awareness, the awareness that a rare connection was mishandled, and as Friedrich Nietzsche observed, "The snake which cannot cast its skin has to die," meaning growth requires painful honesty, and that honesty is exactly what surfaces when the noise fades. For you as a man, the advice is simple and uncompromising. Do not internalize her fear as your responsibility. Your task is not to remain soft for those who did not protect your sincerity, but to refine it for those who will. And this is where Old Stoic wisdom guides action. Focus on self-respect over reassurance, structure over chaos, purpose over approval, because Stoicism win is not about emotional shutdown, it is about emotional command. And an iron mind does not resent the past it uses. It. Short truth matters here. Good men change when they are hurt. Good men do not collapse. Good men recalibrate standards. Good men become harder to access, but clearer to understand. That clarity is what lingers in memory. That clarity is what causes the quiet fear. Not because you became unreachable, but because you became undeniable. In relationships and in life, victory is not loud, it is consistent, and as Seneca said, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, so prepare your character, your health, your finances, your emotional discipline, and let opportunity come to you without pursuit. The fear she carries is a reminder, not a verdict, and your role is not to ease it, but to outgrow the moment that created it, because mastery in modern life means choosing who you become after disappointment. And when you build an iron mind guided by Old Stoic wisdom, you do not just survive the past, you set a standard the future must rise to, and that is how Stoicism win looks in real life: quiet strength, clean conscience, forward motion, and the unshakable sense that you did not lose anything by being genuine. You simply graduated to a higher level of living where memory no longer controls you, but discipline does. 4. The fear that his absence will be permanent. When a good man finally walks away, the fear that follows is not loud, dramatic, or filled with chaos. It is quiet, suffocating, and permanent, because good men do not leave on impulse. They leave after patience has been exhausted, after words have been used carefully, after chances have been handed out like lifelines. And that is what makes his absence so terrifying, because she knows, deeply and instinctively, that this is not a pause, not a tactic, not a lesson. This is an ending. And that realization lands slowly at first, then all at once, when she notices he is no longer checking in, no longer asking questions, no longer reacting, no longer trying to fix what once mattered. And here is the uncomfortable truth rooted in female psychology. Anger can still be negotiated. Frustration still contains hope. Disappointment still leaves a door open. But indifference is emotional closure. And once a man reaches that state, the bond has already been buried because indifference means he has processed the pain, accepted the loss, and redirected his emotional energy elsewhere. And that is what creates fear, not loneliness, not missing him, not even regret, but finality. The terrifying understanding that she can no longer reach him, influence him, or matter to him in the way she once did. And psychology tricks show us that humans fear irreversible outcomes more than temporary discomfort, which is why his silence feels heavier than any argument ever did, because silence from a good man is not punishment, it is peace, and that peace does not include her. And this is where many men underestimate their impact, because while they were trying, explaining, forgiving, and showing up, they were being emotionally present. And presence builds attachment, but absence from someone who once gave stability creates psychological shock, because the nervous system expects consistency, and when that consistency disappears without hostility, the mind scrambles for meaning, replaying moments, conversations, and choices, searching for a way back that no longer exists. And this fear intensifies when she realizes he is not suffering loudly, not posting cryptic messages, not seeking validation, but moving forward quietly. Because that signals emotional maturity, and maturity is hard to manipulate, and that realization cuts deep, because it confirms that she did not just lose a relationship. She lost access to a man who once chose her daily, and here is what men must understand. When you leave with clarity instead of chaos, you leave an imprint that lingers far longer, because calm detachment disrupts expectations, and psychology tricks confirm that unresolved emotional loops keep people mentally tied. But closure without explanation creates a vacuum the mind cannot fill, and that vacuum becomes fear, especially when she understands that good men do not return once they have detached, because detachment is not a reaction, it is a decision, and that is why his absence feels permanent, because it is grounded in self-respect, not resentment, and this moment forces a reckoning within female psychology, where the question is no longer, how do I fix this? But why didn't I value this when I had it? And that question has no comforting answer, because value is recognized most clearly when it is gone. And How to Fall in Love studies show that emotional safety is the foundation of attachment. And once that safety is withdrawn, the loss is felt on a primal level, triggering fear not of being alone, but of having misjudged something rare. And this fear grows when she sees him thriving, not out of spite, but out of alignment, because alignment is attractive, and attraction without access creates emotional tension, and that tension reinforces the finality of his departure. So don't confuse silence with weakness. Don't mistake calm for indifference toward life. Be clear, be grounded, be decisive. Because when a good man leaves without anger, he leaves behind a lesson that cannot be undone, and that is the fear few talk about. The fear that his absence is not temporary, not negotiable, not dramatic, but permanent. And psychology tricks, female psychology, and How to Fall in Love research all agree on one thing. The deepest impact is made not by what is said in the end, but by what is no longer offered. And once that offering stops, the chapter is closed, whether anyone is ready or not. If this message hit home, don't scroll past it. Like this video, share it with a man who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more psychology tricks that reveal the truth about female psychology and how to fall in love without losing yourself. Comment to remember: when a good man becomes indifferent, the door is already closed. 5. The fear of repeating the same pattern with another man. After hurting a good man, the fear that settles in is not about him anymore. It turns inward, sharp and honest, because self-awareness, when it finally arrives, is not gentle, it is revealing, and that revelation can feel brutal. Because patterns begin to surface whether she wants them to or not. Patterns she can no longer unsee, like valuing excitement over stability, mistaking intensity for connection, chasing sparks while overlooking the steady flame that actually keeps a life warm, and this is where the discomfort starts because excitement fades fast, but stability requires presence, patience, and respect. And when those qualities were offered freely and still taken for granted, the mind begins to ask questions it once avoided. She remembers how she tested boundaries instead of honoring them, not because she wanted harm, but because testing felt safer than trusting, because pushing limits gave the illusion of control. Yet control is not connection. And control does not build intimacy, it erodes it slowly, quietly, until the relationship becomes fragile without anyone noticing. Then comes the realization that emotional safety was always there, consistent, calm, reliable, and instead of protecting it, she leaned on it too heavily, assuming it would never disappear, and that assumption becomes the seed of fear. Because once safety is gone, the nervous system remembers the loss and the mind begins to replay it. This is when the fear becomes internal, deeply personal, no longer focused on losing a man, but on losing faith in herself because the questions change tone. They become quieter but heavier. What if I do this again? What if I keep losing good men? What if I am the common denominator? And that last question is the one that lingers because it removes the comfort of blame and replaces it with responsibility, and responsibility, while empowering, is also unsettling when you are not sure you trust your own choices yet. That is the fear few talk about, not the fear of men leaving, but the fear of repeating the same story with a different name, a different face, a different beginning that leads to the same ending, because repetition feels like destiny when patterns go unexamined. From a psychological perspective, this fear grows when she recognizes that good men, especially those who carry themselves like a high value man, are not unlimited resources. They do not line up endlessly. They do not tolerate confusion forever. And they do not stay where they are not respected, and that awareness creates pressure because pressure exposes habits, and habits reveal whether growth has actually happened. She begins to notice that the men she loses share similar qualities: calm presence, emotional steadiness, clear communication, and she realizes those qualities are not boring. They are rare, and rare things require care, not testing, not neglect, not assumption. This is where the fear connects to masculine energy, because men grounded in it offer structure without control, direction without force, and safety without demand. And when that kind of energy leaves repeatedly, it signals something deeper than bad luck. Don't ignore that signal. Don't dismiss it as timing. Be honest. Be reflective. That is where real change begins. The anxiety is not about attracting another man. It is about trusting that she will not sabotage what is healthy when it appears again, because attraction is easy, patterns are not, and while many people know how to attract women or spark interest, far fewer know how to sustain respect once the novelty fades. This fear intensifies with age and experience because lessons accumulate and unresolved lessons repeat themselves, and repetition without growth feels like a trap. She fears meeting another high value man and realizing too late that she is reacting from old habits, choosing excitement over consistency again, mistaking unpredictability for passion again, and watching something good slip away again. And that fear is sobering because it demands accountability rather than charm. You must understand this clearly. This fear is not about men failing her. It is about her fearing she may fail herself again, and that realization is heavy because self-trust is foundational, and once it cracks, everything built on it feels unstable. Masculine energy, when healthy, invites growth, not chaos, and when it is repeatedly rejected, the mirror it holds up becomes uncomfortable to face, yet necessary. Be still long enough to see it. Be humble enough to learn from it. Don't rush into another story without rewriting the script, because attraction without awareness leads back to the same place, and how you choose differently starts with recognizing why you chose the same before. This is where growth becomes possible, where fear transforms into responsibility and responsibility into change, because patterns are not curses, they are signals, and signals exist to guide, not to shame. When she understands that attracting another man is not the challenge, but becoming someone who can sustain a healthy bond is, the fear shifts from panic to purpose, and purpose is what breaks cycles. That is the quiet truth behind this fear, the fear of repeating the same pattern with another man. not because she lacks options, but because she is learning that options mean nothing without self-trust, and self-trust is earned through awareness, restraint, and growth. 6. The fear that she was the problem and can't escape that truth. Here is the truth you are meant to hear, not the softened version, not the comforting story, but the lesson that time always reveals. After a woman hurts a good man, the deepest fear that settles in is not loneliness, not judgment from others, not even regret over what was lost, but the quiet, relentless realization that the problem was never him and that truth has no exit door once it arrives, because blame works in the moment and reflection arrives later, and when distractions fade, clarity takes the wheel, and clarity is merciless because it asks one brutal question that echoes in silence. What if he didn't fail me at all? What if I failed him? And that question doesn't attack from the outside, it attacks identity. It challenges the story someone has told themselves for years. It exposes patterns, decisions, and blind spots that can no longer be explained away. And this is where fear truly lives, because admitting that truth requires responsibility. And responsibility demands change, and change threatens comfort, which is why denial feels safer even though it quietly drains respect from the inside out. Marcus Aurelius warned us of this long ago when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength, and this is Old Stoic wisdom in its raw form, because the mind resists accountability until pain makes it unavoidable, and men who live with an iron mind understand this instinctively. They know that growth begins where excuses end, and that Stoicism win is not about suppressing emotion, but mastering perception. And here is where this matters to you, the man listening now, because your value was never defined by her confusion, her timing, or her inability to meet depth with depth, and yet her fear grows precisely because you showed consistency, patience, and integrity without needing applause. Because when someone encounters that level of presence and still chooses poorly, the memory doesn't fade. It sharpens, it matures, it waits, and modern life accelerates this reckoning because social noise eventually collapses, validation dries up, and silence returns, and in that silence comparison begins, not with fantasy, but with reality. With a man who listened, who stayed steady, who offered peace instead of chaos, and that comparison stings because it cannot be undone. Maya Angelou said it cleanly, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And what time often reveals is not who you were, but who she was unwilling to become then, and that gap becomes terrifying because it suggests a future shaped by the same choices unless confronted honestly, which is why many people run from reflection, because reflection removes shields, and yet the strongest men don't fear this process. They train for it, they welcome it, they refine themselves through it. They adopt Old Stoic wisdom not as philosophy, but as daily discipline. Building an iron mind that does not chase validation or revenge, because Stoicism win means you walk away whole, not hardened, and this is your instruction now. Do not seek closure from someone else's awakening. Do not wait for apology or recognition. Because your victory is already secured the moment you chose self-respect over resentment, the moment you continued building your life instead of explaining your worth, because the quiet power of your example becomes the mirror others must eventually face. And whether they grow or retreat is no longer your concern. Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, and your why is not proving anything to the past, but constructing a future grounded in discipline, clarity, and purpose, and in today's world where distraction is marketed and accountability is avoided. A man with an iron mind stands out without speaking. He moves deliberately. He loves carefully. He leaves cleanly. And he understands that fear in others often emerges when they encounter someone who required them to rise and they chose comfort instead. So let this knowledge sharpen you, not sour you. Let it reinforce your standards, not soften them. Because Stoicism win is not about being unaffected, it's about being unshakable, and Old Stoic wisdom teaches us that peace comes from alignment, not approval. So master your habits, protect your time, choose relationships that meet your level of intention, and walk forward knowing this final truth. When someone fears the realization that they were the problem, it is because they met someone who showed them what responsibility looks like, and that someone was you. And the man who carries that understanding with calm confidence has already mastered life. And now it's your move. If this message hit home, if you understand that real power comes from clarity, not blame, drop this sentence in the comments right now. I don't chase excuses. I stand in truth. Like this video, subscribe for more sharp psychological insight, and remind yourself every day, when reflection replaces blame, control returns to the man who never abandoned himself. 7. The fear of never being loved the same way again. The fear of never being loved the same way again creeps in quietly, and it settles deep, because a good man's love is not loud or performative. It is steady, patient, and present, the kind that doesn't demand applause or keep a mental ledger of favors owed. The kind that gives without turning affection into leverage, and that is exactly why losing it leaves a lasting mark. Understand this clearly. When a woman hurts a good man and watches him walk away, what follows is not immediate regret, but a slow realization that something rare has slipped through her fingers because he loved deeply but calmly, without chasing power, without strings, without trying to shape her into someone else. And once that kind of love disappears, future relationships often feel different in a way that is hard to name but impossible to ignore. Don't dismiss this as nostalgia. Be honest about what happens next, because in female psychology, there is a sharp awareness that the safety she once felt may not return so easily, and even when someone new arrives, attentive and interested, there is an unspoken comparison running in the background, whispering that this new affection feels measured, negotiated, or fragile. While the old love simply existed and endured, that is the fear, not loneliness, not the absence of attention, but the knowledge that the most secure love she ever experienced did not require effort to maintain control or constant reassurance. It just showed up, day after day, and when that disappears, love can start to feel like a contract instead of a refuge. Pay attention here, because psychology tricks often focus on attraction and pursuit, but they rarely talk about the aftermath of losing someone who loved without conditions. And that aftermath is filled with questions like, will anyone ever choose me this freely again? And will love always feel like I have to earn it now? Don't underestimate how heavy those thoughts are, because a good man staying when he didn't have to rewire his expectations, and once that standard is set, it cannot be unseen. Be clear about this truth. The fear is not about punishment or regret. It is about contrast, the stark difference between a love that felt safe and one that feels uncertain. And this is where how to fall in love becomes complicated, because falling in love again means risking disappointment, risking comparison, and risking the quiet grief of knowing that something simpler and steadier once existed. That is why even years later, certain memories linger, not dramatic moments, but small, consistent acts. The way he listened without judgment, the way he stayed calm during conflict, the way his presence reduced chaos instead of adding to it. And those memories create a silent benchmark that future partners are measured against, often without realizing it. Don't confuse this with idealization. Be precise, because female psychology is deeply sensitive to emotional safety, and once it has been experienced and then lost, the absence becomes noticeable in every interaction that feels conditional or uncertain. You must understand that the deepest fear is not that she will never be loved again, but that she will never feel that same sense of being chosen without pressure. And that realization can be unsettling because it forces an internal reckoning with past decisions. This is where psychology tricks reappear, not as tools to manipulate, but as mental defenses, ways to rationalize the loss, to downplay what was given, to convince herself that something similar can easily be replaced. Yet deep down, the knowing remains. Be mindful of this, because how to fall in love again requires trust, and trust is harder to give once you have seen what genuine consistency looks like and then watched it leave. Don't rush past this insight, because it explains why some women seem hesitant, guarded, or overly analytical after losing a good man. It is not coldness, it is caution shaped by experience. That is the quiet consequence. The lingering awareness that love can be gentle and strong at the same time, and that once you have known it, anything less feels unstable. Be honest with yourself, because female psychology does not forget emotional safety easily, and no amount of novelty can fully erase the memory of someone who loved. Without trying to control the outcome, this is why the fear endures, why the comparison persists, and why the thought that returns most often is not, "What if I end up alone?" But what if the safest love I ever had is already behind me? A question that lingers long after the relationship ends, shaping choices, expectations, and the quiet hope that one day love might feel that steady again, even if the heart knows it may never arrive in quite the same way. All right, my friend, thanks for staying with me until the end. Let's be clear and grounded here. This isn't about pointing fingers or reopening wounds. It's about awareness. Emotions have consequences, and actions echo long after the moment passes. Good men rarely advertise their value. Most of the time, it's only felt when their presence is gone and the silence replaces what they once gave freely. So here's the sincere advice. If you're listening to this as a man, never doubt your worth just because you walked away quietly. Leaving with dignity is not weakness, it's strength with self respect. And if you're listening as someone who once took a good heart for granted, learn from it now. Value isn't proven by loss, it should be recognized before regret steps in. If this message connected with you in any way, whether you've lived it, seen it happen, or learned from it, your perspective matters. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might help another man reclaim his self-worth or help someone understand what truly matters before it's too late. Because real maturity isn't about winning or losing relationships. It's about recognizing value while it's still there.